what I would like to see is that citizen science gets adopted by lots of disciplines, and gets basically where it would be an advantage to use it, it gets used. At present, it's only used by a few groups within a few isolated disciplines, and it is spreading, but it's spreading fairly slowly. I mean, it feels quite rapidly to us sometimes, but given the size of science that it could reach, you know, it's taking a long time for everyone to get on board. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that so far there's been, you know, a relatively small group of people who have managed to make a success of it, who have really had a go, taken the risk, and it's worked for. And it's, you know, in those cases it's worked very well. That's great, but it's still a fairly small number of people, and so it's hard for those people to talk to everybody in all the different disciplines, to explain to them how they can do it and pass on their knowledge, and that's an important step, that you have to have some people starting and some people trying it and making mistakes, you know, setting up a web server that immediately dies as soon as it goes on the BBC News because it gets hit by thousands of people, for example. You make these mistakes and you learn from them, and you set up things so that the next time that doesn't happen, next time it's more of a success, and you take that experience, but you need to pass that experience on. And so if you've only got a small group of people, that's hard to do. The first problem is that you have a fairly small group of people who have had a success in citizen science, and so spreading their experience and spreading their knowledge of how to best do it, or at least our current best knowledge of how to do it, to other areas, other disciplines, takes time just to diffuse that information. And then the other thing is that it's hard for people to take the risk. So, you know, there are these small groups like Galaxy Zoo who just went for it and had a go. But in general, and it would be good if lots of people would do that, because then you'd get a much more independent picture of how to go about it, and you might get different ideas, and it would be, you know, overall healthier possibly for citizen science. On the other hand, it's hard for people to take that risk, because most people have got funding pressures, they've got their, you know, traditional kind of research framework that they're working in, and taking that time to have a go at citizen science is seen as a risk for them, and they don't necessarily have the skills. So there's not many, you know, biology researchers, say, who also happen to be great web developers and database experts and web interface designers. So there's a lack of skills in those places as well. Now, one disadvantage of having lots of independent citizen science projects spring up, all trying to do it, and some having great success and some failing, is that it may affect the public perception of citizen science. So I've kind of described before that there are some key aspects to the definition of citizen science that I think are important, and they are that you have an actively involved community, and that your science is real science. It's high enough quality that it's competing with the best stuff in the world, and that you have to be doing citizen science to do it. You know, you're not wasting people's time. And the problem is that if you have different groups, maybe without such a stringent idea of what citizen science is, starting to do citizen science, then you could have a bad impression go up. You know, a few cases where you maybe have a very exciting project that attracts hundreds of thousands of people, but then doesn't actually produce any science. You know, could be very damaging, or turns out that they weren't recording the results, or, you know, something like that could have a very negative effect on the community. The public's perception of citizen science, and could actually take away from the good projects by just making people stop doing citizen science and going back to watching EastEnders, for example. So, so I think there is something to be said about making the use of the kind of current nucleuses of experience that you have in the community and trying to do things through them rather than just encouraging everyone to start doing citizen science spontaneously. So, what's the question?
The question was what's getting in the way. So you've kind
Yeah.
of, you've identified where some problem areas might arise, where it might trip itself up, and
Yeah.
so forth.
So, so really, the thing getting in the way. So, some of the things getting in the way are that you have a lack of funding. I mean, as ever, more money would help, but money in the right places. So, money to help take the experience that the successful groups have had and transfer it across to other disciplines. That's it would be money well spent. And the other aspect is allowing researchers, kind of traditional posts in universities, use funds or access funds that they can use for non-traditional purposes. So a lot of funding is currently tied to the idea of appointing a postdoc who will have a PhD in the subject of the department in which he sits and will have a good publication record, etc., etc. And it's very hard to find a web developer, a very talented web developer who is also a very talented biologist, astronomer, historian, etc. And so, and it just doesn't make sense if what you need is somebody who's very good at putting together a website, and that's actually something that's more complicated than you might think, to make a website that's actually resilient to being used by large numbers of people, and getting a news story and suddenly having huge spikes in traffic and recording all the results in a very robust way so that there's no chance that you're going to lose that data and that the data will be scientifically useful. In order to have those skills, really you should be appointing people who have web and development skills rather than people who are necessarily good at astronomers. And there's not a lot of funding around that can enable an astronomer, say, to employ a computer expert. And when I say a computer expert, I definitely don't mean a computer scientist, because it's one way that this has been tackled in the past is by having people sitting in computer science departments who are doing things like this. And there is potential for that to work, but usually a computer scientist is interested in doing science about computational algorithms and techniques. And so that's not the same person who will be the best person to go and build a working commercial style website. So I think funders would be very wise to be funding things where funding non-traditional posts, potentially within universities, or alternatively encouraging, if the university setting isn't the right place for that, encouraging people to form companies or take existing companies and providing funds so that a researcher can go to a company and say, I want to do citizen science, I need a website that does this, 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 this and this, and you have the experience of doing that, can you help, rather than having to kind of follow the traditional role of just figuring it out by themselves. So